that's in me. Bless his holy name. 'Cause when I bless him, things will change. Everything that's in me.
I shared my study space with a young Christian woman so that we could revise through the holidays, ready for our exams in January. Now, during this time, I became concerned that she was developing romantic interest in me. I was in my early 20s. I've got an Italian heritage. Surely everyone finds me attractive. But I'm English enough to know that I had to politely and diplomatically let her know I didn't feel the same way. So I chose my moment and I said to her, I'm concerned that I'm distracting you from your studies. She knew what I was saying. And she looked at me with her steely eyes and said, Attilio, you are not a worthwhile distraction. It stings. So that rather clumsy opening is to talk about something that many of us feel is a worthless distraction. Let me ask you this. What are 4 billion people in the world in 2024 going to be asked to do? Vote. Absolutely. It's an amazing year, 2024, because half the world's population, 4 billion, will be asked to vote. Okay? The Russians have already had their democratic election. This is politics, we can talk about it. The Indians are voting right now, and we are going to be probably called to a national election in the later part of this year. Some people say maybe January. Politics is what I want to talk about this morning, and you'll be pleased to know at the end I'll be telling you exactly how to vote. Now, what's quite interesting about politics is most of our culture is cynical and disengaged. Now, by cynical, I mean that most people ascribe bad motives to politicians. They think they're just in it for themselves, or on a power trip, or a worst-case scenario, they're corrupt. And most people in this culture are completely disengaged, don't think politics relates to them. And sometimes, some people in this culture, we're very, very angry, but we're completely ineffective. In national elections, going back, way back, the average is 70% of people vote. And in sort of local elections, even less. So we've got more than 100 people here this morning. And I know that not everybody in this room has the votes in this country. But if that's the numbers are about right, and there's 100 of us, that means 30 of us are not going to vote. Because we do follow within the church the cultural thing of disengaged, cynical, and angry and ineffective. Now, I know there's a lot of reasons why those 30 people don't vote. It could be because they are sick or not available at time. They might be traveling. But that's a really big number, 30 people out of 100. So what I want to do today is talk about why we are so disengaged. Now, as Christians, those of us here who've made that decision to follow Christ, we know we're citizens of heaven. Okay, so we have that understanding that we worship him. We have a faith that we try and work out in this world here. And we're also sort of citizens of the world. And trying to navigate what that means is a form of saying discipleship. But when it comes to politics, we seem to be more like the world, I would say, than we are like citizens of heaven, because we are cynical, disengaged, or angry. So what I want to do today is just look at that, but give you some caveats first, okay? So I've not studied politics formally. So those of you who have might see lots of holes in what I've got to say, which is fine. We can discuss that later. Inevitably, the things that I say will come out of a political view that's based in this country, because this is where I was born and grew up. And I do know that the way politics is expressed in other parts of the world is very, very different. So if I say something crass or insensitive, then I know you'll forgive me, because we're in church. And I also know that for many people in this room, politics affects you in your daily work. The NHS, education, social care, and other places. So again, I hope I don't say anything insensitive there. So let's start with the go-to verse. Okay, so when Christians think about politics, they probably think about this verse in 1 Timothy, or these verses, 1 Timothy 2, verses 1 to 4. I urge then that first of all, that petitions, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. This is good and pleases God our Saviour, who wants all people to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. So if you've had the opportunity during your life to study the Bible, you all know that's probably the verse we go to. We need to pray for those in authority. I wonder how many of us have mentioned that it says not just prayers, intercessions, but with thanksgiving. We're supposed to thank the Lord for the people who hold political power. There's a challenge to cynicism. But I think the problem with this verse, or these verses, it's almost like if you know the game Monopoly, get out of jail free card. We do this, and then we don't have to do anything else. But look, it says we pray for those in authority so we can have quiet lives, peaceful lives, and there's a sense in which it's good for the gospel, so that all people will be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. So what I want to do today is I'm going to just analyse and maybe get us to think about politics through 3 comforting lies that we tell ourselves. I'll tell you about Mr. Bretherton in a minute. Okay. Here's the 3 lies we tell ourselves as Christians. Number 1, politics is irrelevant for normal people. Number 2, Christians are above politics. And number 3, we cannot make a difference. And a lot of what I'm going to say today about these 3 areas comes from a really good writing from Dr. Luke Bretherton, who you may have heard of or not, who's got a real excellent way of analysing and thinking about our involvement in politics. So first off, politics is irrelevant for normal people. That's what most people think. If we take this as a sort of almost deeply theoretical thing, in any large human societies, people are going to meet people they disagree with, people they violently disagree with, people they don't like, people who have their arguments with about the use of resources. And when that happens, there's 3 options how those societies can operate. They can kill those other people. That happens and is happening in human history right now. They can dominate those other people, subjugate them, just make them do what they want. Or they can persecute them and make them go away. Politics is a way of navigating, compromising, agreeing, disagreeing agreeably, so that we can all live some sort of common life in peace and holiness. It's a way of not having to resort to killing, dominating, or persecuting. And so it's really important to understand that politics is very, very important to everybody. We can't say it's irrelevant. We are all interdependent. Just think of us here right now. All of this stuff around us, the electricity, the building, the roads, everything that makes our lives tick is controlled by political power in this country and everywhere around the world. Water, food, dare I say the sewage. Political systems control all of this. So it's wrong to think that we are irrelevant to it and it is irrelevant to us. But there's a second reason, and I think that our sorts of churches don't often think about this. It's important for social justice. There are many billionaires in this world who are wonderful philanthropists who want to give away their money and do great things. As many of them they are, they're not going to solve everything. They can't get social justice in at scale. There's many wonderful charities in this country and around the world. But those charities cannot bring those changes at scale. There's many wonderful churches. We cannot bring those things at scale. Now, in Europe, going way back, it was Christianity that brought hospitals, schools, welfare for the poor. That was, if you like, the motivation. That's what motivated the governments. But the governments had to put them in to make them happen at scale. So if we care about social justice, we really do need to care about politics, even though that can be really, really tricky. So number 2, Christians are above politics. This is a thought that we have. And that allows us to become cynical, disengaged, or angry. But so much of what powers our political views is actually a bit theological. Let me give you 2 thoughts. Here's a political thought. Okay, this is a political thought. People need to work hard to earn money to look after themselves and their family and pay some tax so we can have a common infrastructure, roads and electricity and everything. That's a political thought. And let's add to that thought and say, and we shouldn't help people who don't work hard or get into difficulty because it's probably their fault and they shouldn't be taking our tax money. Okay? That's a political thought. Let's give you the opposite political thought. People are frail human beings, and through no fault of their own, they sometimes get into difficulty. They get sick, they can't get a job, maybe there's something wrong with the jobs in the area of society, so we need to help them as much as possible. Therefore, we need to pay a lot of tax to help them. Right? Both are political thoughts. Both are talking about morality. Both are talking about social justice. Both are talking about theological and spiritual things. So we need to wrestle with that in our faith. People need to bring that and not just think that we're above it all. There's even a thought, a Christian thought particularly, I would say, when it comes to climate change and pollution, it doesn't matter. Jesus is coming back. That's quite hard-hearted, isn't it? Now, maybe you think that's the right case. That's fine. That's politics. Let's all agree disagreeably. So those political thoughts, we think we're above it because we have faith, but they actually are coming maybe from our faith. Let me give you another couple of thoughts, and here I'm going to have to introduce 2 big words: ascensionist and declensionist. Okay? An ascensionist believes everything's getting better, and a declensionist believes everything's getting worse. You can now be deciding which one of those you are. So an ascensionist would say something like this: we're leaving behind the past. It was patriarchal. Men ran everything. It was misogynist. Women weren't allowed to do anything. It was colonial. It was racist. And we're moving ever forward. So an extensionist wouldn't say all of those things is fixed, but we're moving forward to a good day. A declensionist would say, oh, things are really bad, and they were much better in the old days, much better in the 1950s, or the 1850s, or the 1750s, wherever you want to choose. Look at this here. Who said this? The world is passing through troublesome times. Young people of today think nothing of nothing but themselves. They have no reverence for parents or old age. They're impatient. They talk as if they know everything. And what passes for wisdom with us is foolishness with them. As for the girls, they are forward, immodest, unladylike in speech, behaviour, and dress. Do you think that was said after the Second World War or before the Second World War? Before. How far before? How many? 2000. About 800. This was Peter the Hermit, okay? A Christian mystic. And he should have known what it says in Ecclesiastes 7:10. Do not assert that the past was better than the present, for such a statement is not a sign of wisdom. Extensionist, things are getting better. Declensionist, things are getting worse, are two political views, neither of which we should take to as Christians. And there's two reasons for this. One is practical, and one is spiritual. So let's do the practical one, okay? From my own life, you can run both stories. I was born in 1961. I'll be 63 in July, save you doing the maths. I know I look older. Thank you. Yeah. I'm like a second-hand car. It's not the age of the problem, it's the mileage. Now, I could run the story of my life as an extensionist and say, look, 20 years before I was born, 15 years before I was born, we just had the Second World War come to an end. Things were getting better. Okay, the National Health Service hadn't long been established. I got all sorts of vaccinations, which meant I didn't become a victim of infant mortality as so many would have done before me. Okay, the welfare state was there. Free education. I'm a first-generation immigrant, but I was allowed to have education, and because of that, I got a good job. Because of that, I was able to marry someone who didn't think I was a worthless distraction. So I can run my life that way and say, look, things are getting better. Things are getting better. Or I could run it again as be a declensionist and say, actually, in that time, the gap between rich and poor has grown. In that time, there is another war in Europe. We've had a pandemic, cost of living crisis. Things are getting worse. But both views are wrong. And this is why. It's a spiritual reason they're wrong. And Dr. Luke, who I've looked at his writings, he says, neither view's are Christian because it's not us that's the centre of history, it's Jesus. Christ divides history, and Christ is made present to all times by the work of the Spirit. We can participate in Christ at any time. So we shouldn't tell backward-looking stories or forward-looking stories because Christ is the centre of history. And tied up within our faith, there is this sense of there were good things in the past we need to preserve, but there is good things in the future that we need to look towards. Most famously in this verse, salt and light. You are the salt of the earth. So the idea is that the people of faith, there are things in society and from old days we need to preserve, but we're the light of the world. We're pointing to a better day. So when we're thinking politically, we cannot get caught up with an extensionist or declensionist thing, because ultimately that's centering on your own life's experience. And we'll all have different views of our life's experience based on where we grew up and where we are now. A theologian once said, humane politics always involves a dance between preservation and progress. So lastly, we cannot make a difference. This is a word cloud of many, many different sorts of political systems, okay? I don't know if you know all of them. My favourite is kleptocracy. That's where a society's been running quite well for a while and then some people come along and steal the power. Or plutocracy is another one where you've got a few rich families that run everything. Now, all you budding comedians and satirists out there will say, we're living in a, and then pick one of those. The political scholars say that we live in a constitutional monarchy, or a liberal democracy. And the thought is that our votes don't really make some difference. That's why many of us are disengaged, that the votes don't actually change things. Now, there are many, many places in the world with these different sorts of political systems where the barrier to making change is quite high. Right? It's very, very difficult to make a change for social justice in a tyranny or a dictatorship or a place where democratic elections aren't really democratic. But we have more freedom here. We can vote. We can vote in local elections, national elections, and also influence our politicians in different ways. Now, did you know that we can also fill in online petitions? Didn't know if you knew this. And if you get 10,000 signatures, Parliament has to respond. And if you get 100,000 signatures, they have to really consider discussing it. This is an interesting one now called None of the Above. Have you heard of this one? It's almost at 6,000 signatures now. And these two gentlemen have put it forward. What they want is on the ballot paper for the national election, it'll have all the different parties, and then it'll have one that says none of the above. I know politicians are thick-skinned, but can you imagine if you're not voted for even as last resort? This is many different ways that we can affect things. I believe, though, that when we vote, I'm going out on a limb here, we're also doing something prophetic. We're also doing something prophetic. Because at the bottom of democracy, there are these three principles. Now, democracy was not invented by Christianity. It was invented by the Greeks or something. And when democracy first started in their theory, only rich men had the vote. And so democracy was being developed, and as it came to this country, democracy was only for rich men over a certain age, then it became to all men, and then women were allowed to vote, but that's less than 100 years ago. But underneath the idea of democracy, Dr. Luke says, there are these three principles, which means when you vote, in a funny way, you're making a stand for these three principles. And the first principle that comes from Christianity is everybody is included. Everybody has a vote. Everybody has a say. Everybody has agency. That's not true of all political systems. Secondly, the law applies to everybody. Now, from Old Testament times, God made a covenant with his people, and then the covenant has a law around that as well, which says, I'm your God, you are my people, and you also have a covenant with each other, and nobody is above the law. The king isn't above the law, the prince isn't above the law, nobody is above the law. That's a really deep, deep principle. If you think about that, in dictatorships, they don't go with that, right? In tyrannies, where they want to appear democratic, they pretend they're sticking to the law and then just change the law to suit themselves, okay? That's really, really deep. And the idea is not just the law as rules and regulations, but the covenant underneath that. The covenant we have to God and the covenant that we have to each other to live in a common humanity. And then lastly, political power is limited. That's why we vote. In a democracy, they don't stay in forever. They have to be voted in, and then they can be voted out. All the offices. Because the concept is we are so fallen as human beings that there's no one smart enough. No one's got the perfect ideology. No one's got the perfect intelligence. No one's got the perfect wisdom. And it's all too possible to fall into corruption. So power has to be limited. When we vote, I believe we're saying something positive about these three Christian principles. So, I'm now going to tell you how to vote. There's two default positions. Either we don't bother, or we vote by tradition. Yeah? Now, when the election does come up, none of us, I think, is going to have the headspace to be able to read every manifesto, listen to every interview with every politician, and make a decision. And if we think that politics is all about the economy, I don't think any of us is going to sit there and read all of the reports from the Treasury and the Bank of England and economic this, that, and the other going back many, many years, are we? But we still need to make a decision, don't we? What do Christians do when they've got a really important decision to make and they don't have wisdom? The sound isn't very good here. What do? Why shouldn't voting be a prayerful decision? So this is how you should vote. Prayerfully, prophetically. And two more things. Very practical. You need to bring a voter ID. You might have seen in the news yesterday someone forgot to bring their voter ID. You could look it up online. You need to bring your voter ID. And very lastly, you need to vote. Now, I hope I've just communicated something to you why we should not be cynical. Okay? The Bible is clear. We pray with thanksgiving. We should not be disengaged, because it is a wonderful route to bring social justice. And we should not just get angry and not do anything. We need to pray. The election is before us, but even more immediately, so is tea, coffee, and biscuits. God bless you for your attention this morning. Have a great week.
Everything that's in me, bless his holy name. 'Cause when I bless him, things will change. Everything that's in me,